us. So let's pray. God of all grace, you are the one who has called us. You are the one who has created us. You are the one who called us to be followers of Jesus. So be with us now as we share in this time, that we might understand not just what's happening, but where we are and how you can move through us and use us. Bless us as we seek your guidance through the power of the Holy Spirit and through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. Well, I want to start just by saying we've got slides and we have handouts. So those who didn't, Sue Kerr following this will be sure, and she'll be out front. Y'all can give her, whoever wants the PDF of this slide handout. You can get your name on her list, and she'll email you that. I'll try to I'll make sure I'm covering. Amy, is the back projector on? If we can get that, so I can make sure I see where we are. The way I'm going to proceed with this, and you see the handout, so you kind of know how I'm proceeding. That to do a little bit of a review and to sort of remind you of the briefing that we did before General Conference. I want you to see how things were, kind of be reminded of where we were, what was possible, and then to know where we've gone and what steps are up. And the thing that happens, and this is the thing that I want to reinforce, is that I'm making every step. While I do have emotions about this, and I have some very guttural, gut level reactions and some guttural responses to it, and but the thing that I can't afford to do is to be reactive. We have to be responsive, and so that's what we're called to do, is simply to be responsive to the actions the General Conference has taken, to know who we are aligned with and how we move forward. So there are a lot of things that have even happened. For those of you, how many of you watched Adam Hamilton's presentation, the hour-long? Several of you did. Even since he did that, we've had more things that have happened. So that's the thing I want you to hear, is it's an evolving, ongoing conversation. But to review, the 3 plans that were presented, and I'm just going to walk us through these. That first was the one church plan that would have left decisions about same-gender marriages up to local church, and individual clergy would have said we are free to include everybody in our group in the full scope of our ministry and care, and would have left ordination matters, even regarding LGBTQIA inquiries, up to or candidacies up to the annual conference, which meant that annual conferences could still have chosen not to ordain LGBTQIA people, but there would be places within the connection somewhere where they would be able to serve. And so that's something that we have to know was out on the table. The one church plan also would have given jurisdictional or central conference oversight concerning contextual rights. Interestingly, this is one of the realities we face, is that according to the discipline, those churches that exist in the Central Conference, and for those who have been around a long time, the idea of Central Conference actually was used in a negative way. It was used to marginalize African American people in the U.S. is how we used it. We created the Central Conference for all the black churches, so they could all be together and have their own unique version of it, instead of saying we are all in this together. But one of the places that the Central Conferences have actually been successful has been when we're overseas in context that us U.S. Christians do not understand and cannot appropriate. And so Central Conferences would, for instance, in Africa, Africans have some contextual considerations, so they can actually choose some variation on our rules within their context. They're already given that. And so you have, wherever there's a central conference in Europe and Eurasia and Asia, the main part of Asia, and in the African continent, those central conferences, they still can make some variations. Here's the interesting thing, is that when it comes to context, the Christians, the Methodists in the U.S. do not get it. The whole church gets to come together and tell us what we can and cannot do in the U.S. That's the way it basically plays out. Now, that's an oversimplification, but that's really the way it's written. So that therefore, where a central conference could make a decision about human sexuality in some way and really get away with it, then we can't in the U.S. So that's one big thing. But the election of bishops, and there's some terms. I didn't put all these up on the screen, but there's some terms you're going to need to hear, and I want you to know that when we talk about the College of Bishops, that's within the jurisdiction. In a little while, you're going to see a map and remind me, and we'll talk about that's where the College of Bishops is for each jurisdiction. Okay, the Council of Bishops, which sounds very similar. Council of Bishops is all the bishops across the globe, the global church, the bishops of the global church. There are certain things by the discipline that are held in reserve for the College of Bishops that the Council of Bishops has no authority over, okay? And so there was an effort, when we get to the traditional plan, we'll talk about some of the things that have happened and some of the constitutional challenges on those. So we'll talk about that. But the One Church plan would have definitely held us together as a United Methodist Church with a wide array of understandings concerning human sexuality. Okay? The next plan was called the Connectional Conference Plan. And basically what it was proposing was 3 distinct non-geographic jurisdictions within the U.S., which meant that it would no longer be drawn by any kind of geographic boundary. It would be overlays. And for those who have been longtime Methodists in this area, in Texas or even in Oklahoma, you would remember that we had formerly the Oklahoma Indian Missionary Conference, OIMC, that it was Bishop of Oklahoma shared both of those, right? And then we had the Rio Grande Conference, which was the largely Spanish-speaking conference, and it was really another overlay and came from San Antonio. Now here's the thing, both of those conferences were ethnic conferences that were overlays of our geographic boundaries. So we had in up near Fort Worth, actually, at one point, we had both the OIMC church, we had the Central Texas Church, and we had close by was a Rio Grande church. So we had 3 conferences within the same area. So this was a similar kind of understanding, is that we could have churches that could belong to whatever connection they want, connectional jurisdictional conference they wanted to belong to. So for instance, we could have chosen the Compatibilist Progressive Conference for our church and said, we will meet wherever they would divide into multiple conferences within. We'd have a larger geographic geographic boundary, so we would cover more ground. But it was at least a plan, and that was largely dismissed because it required so many constitutional changes, and the thought was, we'll never get these constitutional changes done. The reality is that what we've discovered since General Conference is that we need reconstitution as a church. We need to be reconstituted. There's not a question as far as I'm concerned. And so that's one of the things. So you see the different jurisdictions that would have been created with that. The Connectional Conference Plan also would have resulted in the constitutional amendments, and we would have been united in common mission and global influence, while still providing a large safe space for people within their own context. So we would have people that would unite with other people. So progressives would be with progressives, and traditionalists would be with traditionalists. And which I'm going to say a word too about traditional. The word traditional is not, don't think tradition like going back to 1784. It's not that tradition. a tradition that dates back as far as 1972. So when they call it traditional, it's really a misnomer. That's not correct. Traditional is John Wesley full of grace, if you want to know my take on what traditional is. So, the traditional plan that was adopted by General Conference of 2019 in February, and for those who want details, and I actually have a copy of this. I didn't really make copies or bring down here, but it's kind of a hard read, but Milton has actually like all of the list of the petitions. So all these petitions come in, and we'll talk about how they played out, but the various things that were passed, not passed, and so forth. So if you really want to have fun reading, you can read the entirety of the Daily Christian Advocate. Came out to be 600 pages, so it's, and he has just one. He has the wrap-up. Is that right? I think it's one he has. So you can find it online. You can find DCA online still, and we'll make sure you know how to do that for those who really like reading all that stuff. I'm going to give you the overview. The traditional plan retains the language that was already in the Book of Discipline, plus creates harsher, more punitive consequences for disobedience to the discipline. So in other words, if I did a same-gender marriage, under the current discipline, I could be charged. I could have a charge brought against me, and then the discipline calls for us to work on to work out. I lost the term; it's out of my head. Just resolution. We come to a just resolution. So it's in negotiation, and it may end up being a short term of administrative leave and so forth. If it's something that's really bad, that probably wouldn't even be this, but anything else could result in termination of credentials, loss of livelihood. But what happened was that this legislation, as it came out, said that for clergy who perform a same-gender marriage would automatically be suspended without even a trial, automatically suspended for 1 year. So I would be gone for 1 year. And then, with a pledge that I would not repeat it, because if I repeated it, automatically I would lose my credentials. Automatically it would be taken away, okay? And so there are some constitutional questions related to those, to some of this. The other part of this is that, let's see, what am I missing? Oh, that any clergy who identify openly as LGBTQIA+, actually, it's not even open. If it's somebody who used to was self-avowed, proclaiming homosexual, was how it was used in the discipline prior to, and if you were self-avowed, then you'd be called into question. But we lived in an era for a time of kind of don't ask, don't tell kind of thing. What happened was that the General Conference basically says, if we have somebody and we know that they're in a same-gender marriage, or we know that they have an openly gay lifestyle, then automatically those clergy are out. They're done. There's nothing else. No conversation. They're done. They're just no longer. They no longer hold credentials in the church. And so, and the same would happen with bishops, and we have a lesbian bishop in the Western jurisdiction. We'll talk about Karen in just a little bit. So those are critical things. The other thing is that the enforcement of restrictions for the bishops would no longer reside with the College of Bishops. Remember, I was telling you about College of Bishops versus Council of Bishops. The College of Bishops is one who basically oversees the character and behavior of their, unless it rises, and I think there may be some disciplinary language that lets it rise up to the council level, but for the most part, the behavior and oversight of the bishops is handled through the College of Bishops in the jurisdictions. So anybody, I know we have clergy in the room here, anybody have a different understanding of that? So what they're wanting to do is to make the Council of Bishops become an enforcer, to rise everything away from the jurisdiction, so that Karen Oliveto, who serves as the bishop of the Big Sky Conference, Conference in Colorado and Wyoming, would no longer have, she would no longer just answer to the Western College of Bishops, which is largely or 100% sympathetic toward her and protects her and keeps her safe. But what this legislation would do would say, now we're going to move it up this level. Well, guess who's in the Council of Bishops? We have a host of African bishops. We have Eurasian bishops. We have bishops who are very conservative within the U.S., including the one who is our bishop, and that group could have enough influence over a council of bishops. And what they would do would be create a body that would be able to strip bishops of their right, regardless of how the jurisdiction voted in electing them. That the council of bishops could simply negate that and take it away. And so that is a constitutional concern. Okay, so those are some big things, and it greatly restricts the latitude of those involved in church trials to try and come to just resolution within the annual conference, and it's simply not there for us. So any questions thus far? Now questions that were submitted I'm going to be talking about as we go to the end, but I want to ask if anybody is unclear. I mean, I know it's trying to make sense of this structure of ours. So understanding the jurisdictions, on the next slide, what you see is the jurisdictions in the U.S., okay? So in your upper right, you see the northeastern jurisdiction. And it's really easy. This is the easiest part about our geography. Northeastern, look down where Florida is, that's southeastern jurisdiction. Then north central, the blue, and then down straight below that is where we are in the south central jurisdiction, okay? And then this big chunk of the west that includes Alaska and Hawaii and actually Guam is the western jurisdiction, okay? The western jurisdiction is going to be important in how we go forward, because the western jurisdiction is the one that almost across the board, it's not to say that there are not some more conservative pastors and some more conservative churches there, but by and large, the jurisdiction as a whole speaks to the progressive side. They are perhaps our strongest, biggest allies in speaking a progressive message to the church. Okay, so I want you to remember that. Now, since the General Conference, Adam Hamilton and who is pastor at Church of the Resurrection, which is the largest United Methodist church. I don't even know what they worship anymore. It's in the thousands, but Adam has taken a stand, along with his church. His leadership has endorsed this, that the traditional plan is unacceptable. We will not accept the traditional plan. This is to such a place that this will split the church. If the traditional plan is approved as it was accepted, and the Judicial Council does not bar anything from it, then it's unacceptable, and we will not stay in this. The church, and this is by and large, this isn't just Adam Hamilton. This is actually most of us who understand the church is the United Methodist Church as we have known no longer exists. And so this isn't us just raising a fuss about this thing and maybe we'll all settle down and just go back to the way we were. What has happened now has been a clear break with where we have been. And so the discipline that we have will not, now it may go back to being that after the Judicial Council's done, but even that's no longer acceptable. We're tired of having this fight and we're no longer willing to keep going with this. So Adam has called together 50 or so. I've heard 50, but then I've heard some different numbers out there. Top leaders who generally had been associated with the Uniting Methodist. If you recall, I went to the very first Uniting Methodist conference, as I guess we would call it, or meeting in Atlanta back in November of 17. And so that's the group that's called Uniting. And remember, it's not United, it's Uniting. So it was the group that was calling for the one church plan and trying to make sure that we got this going and really worked hard to make this happen. Those leaders have largely banded together, and we are no longer willing to just let status quo be status quo. We're no longer happy with that. Even, again, if we're just left with the discipline that we currently have, we're not accepting that. And so, I do not know, I know there's one meeting in Dallas, and there's one meeting in, I think, Atlanta, where Adam Hamilton is calling these leaders together. Okay, so I don't know more about that. I just know that he's pulling people together. Here's something that's important that you need to know, and I'll talk about what our board has said about this. But Adam announced that their annual Leadership Institute, every year, every fall, Church of the Resurrection has a Leadership Institute, and they bring together thousands of people who come in from all over the place to learn and train on leadership. And so they're really trying to develop and enhance leadership across the church, and that's their big goal. Well, they announced that their Leadership Institute for this year in September will address our way forward as centrists and progressives, how we will move forward. So that's what this is about, is about how we move forward on this. Though you can't see it very well on there, the link is LI for those who need to write in your margin, because it's also blue. Well, it's actually on the black and white, it may be more visible, but it's li.cor.org. And we already have, from our board, we have a number of people who have said that they're interested in participating in that. So we may well be taking a group to Kansas City, and Andy's got it up there so you can just come see. And it says the details of it won't come up until May of 2019. So you can't register yet, but we'll let you know whenever that's available for those who wish to go. We have enough. We may see if we can work out some kind of a transportation arrangement. So and Adam, I've said this all along, Adam Hamilton, and I appreciate him for this. He's the pastor of the largest church. He's the one that founded this church. I worshiped with them when they were 250 people meeting in the gym, and watching this church take off and go has been phenomenal. He has an incredible vision. He knows how to lead, and the thing that I will tell you, there's still a humility about him that I respect. He's not going to be the one who's going to say it's all about me. He is going to be that leader that says, if I'm not the right leader, I'm glad to step aside. For those who watched that 2-hour thing, that was our hour-long program of his, that was one of the things he said. It doesn't have to be about me. Western jurisdiction, as I said, probably our strongest broad-based ally in this conversation. They have pledged not only dissent, but resistance. So what does that mean? That means that they will be ordaining LGBTQIA people. They will be performing marriages that are, regardless of genders in the relationship, they will be performing marriages. They have completely rejected, as a whole, the traditional plan with a statement on a new expression of United Methodism. And in their language, there's a new thing that's being born. It's important to know what others are saying, especially at that level. And there are some churches that are asking, hey, no matter where we are, can we be part of the Western jurisdiction? I'd vote. But we're not going there yet. I want to be clear. The other thing is that they're reaching out beyond their boundaries. They're reaching out. So this link that's in there for their full statement, and you can sign up for to be included on their email chain, which it often is coming out of the Idaho. What's the conference name? Anybody know? Oregon. Yeah, Oregon Idaho conference, and so a lot of our emails come from there. So that's important for you to know. They are perfectly positioned to lead either in the struggle for the UMC or in the formation of a new expression of Methodism. Okay, so that's something that is important. In Texas, I want to share with you. In Texas, the centrists have joined together with progressives in speaking boldly to power through these various things. Advertising. We'll talk about that in a second. I signed on. You'll see that on one of the other screens. But I signed on. This was the ad that was in the paper, in the Dallas Morning News. It was a full-page ad. And what it says, because it's hard to read on your small piece of paper, is in late February, the United Methodist Church gathered for a global general conference to debate our denomination's policies regarding same-gender weddings and openly gay, lesbian, and bisexual clergy. Many North Texas Methodists worked hard to make the church a more welcoming place for ministry with people who identify as LGBTQ+ spectrum. 864 delegates from around the world, however, narrowly approved a plan that continues our denomination's prohibitions. We cannot speak for our denomination, but we can speak to what we believe as a result of the values instilled in us by our interpretation of Scripture and Methodist tradition. We are sorry. We recognize the harm done through speeches, headlines, insensitive statements, and continued policies that reduce our LGBTQ+ siblings to issues and other. We are sorry for the untold pain that churches bring to the LGBTQ+ persons, intentionally and unintentionally. We welcome, celebrate, and embrace you. While we continue to work for greater inclusion within our larger denomination, we are committed to working with you to create and sustain communities here in North Texas, which includes our Central Texas Conference, that recognize LGBTQ+ persons as beloved children of God, something that should never be in question. You shouldn't have to choose between your sexual orientation or true gender identity and your relationship with God and the church. It's a blessing when LGBTQ+ members of our community are part of our church, of the churches we serve. Some of us identify on the LGBTQ+ spectrum. Some of us have been in ministry with LGBTQ+ community for decades. Others are just now experiencing a change of heart. All of us will make mistakes. We'd like to ask for your help in crafting a new future for the churches and communities that reflects the inclusive and expansive love of Jesus Christ. And that was the ad, and I submitted my name, which got put right there. So I am joining in every way possible to speak for us, to speak inclusivity, and to speak dissent to the General Conference. So the other thing, we have organizational efforts that are going on in various parts. So in the Texas Conference, there's a group in Houston that's forming, and in North Texas, which is centered in Dallas, headquartered in Dallas, there's a group there. Rio, Texas annual conference, which is San Antonio and Austin, has a group there, and then Central Texas has a group that is forming. And so that's something that's important. As we work on this, one of the things that I will tell you, I was invited by Sid Hall, Dr. Sid Hall, who is the pastor at Trinity United Methodist Church, to join with a group of progressive and reconciling pastors from Austin. There are 5 reconciling congregations in Austin, and to join in a conversation that would help lead their conference. And so I was invited into that. One of the things I realized was that in that, the group kept talking about how we connect with other conferences, having conversations with other conferences. And I sat there at the table realizing that there are progressive people in our conference, and that nobody's taken the step to organize it. So I checked one last time to make sure there was nobody that was out there about to do something. And that was on Monday afternoon. I met with them Monday night. I created an email with using Jot Form to simply sign people up for things, if y'all ever used that, and created a way to sign up, and I wanted it to be organic, and I thought it might be biblical. I ended up with 7 names, and so I sent it to 7 people, and I said, share this with whomever you wish. And it was a fairly long email that stated, we are asking any progressive to centrist clergy who want to be part of this conversation to join us. And after sending out those first 7 emails today, with Dr. Basak signing on, we have 63 names on the list, and it continues to grow. So we are now planning a gathering, and Tim Brewster, Dr. Tim Brewster, who I'll talk about in a moment. Tim was the one who has been really a good spokesperson for us, for our conference. And so Tim and I have been in conversation, and so we're the ones that are kind of leading this effort in our conference. The one date we can both be together because of his schedule and my schedule is going to be an odd Tuesday evening in Glen Rose, Texas, after the Board of Ordained Ministry, which our board meets for interviews, and so they have interviews going on Monday and Tuesday, and after that, on Tuesday, we're going to meet in Glen Rose, and so that's the only time we can have this. So we are organizing, and we're working to find our voice. That's the problem that we have so often. And one of the things that happens, and this is just an aside, this is me sort of reflecting on this with you, that the conservative side of this argument has gotten it down to one word. Does anybody know what that one word is? Orthodoxy. Yeah, they like orthodoxy. So it's all one word. The problem is that we have, and I've blogged about this, I've talked about this, but Wesley, while he was orthodox in some of his practices, he was not orthodox. When he was challenged, he held the Lincoln Chair at Oxford University, and as a priest, as an Anglican priest, he was permitted to go and be in different areas, unless a local parish priest did not want that person preaching in their parish. And so he was told multiple times not to be in various parishes because he was causing a ruckus. And when he finally journaled what his thought was on it, and he said, "I look upon the world as my parish." And that came back to me again in a lecture in November of 17 when David Field was lecturing at the Uniting Methodist gathering. And he said, that, my friends, is an act of ecclesial disobedience. So we have a standard. If I want to follow Wesley, I can be disobedient and follow Wesley. And so that's something that we need to understand, is that resistance is not only a 20th and 21st century thing, it is a Wesleyan thing. So that's something very important. But the more progressive people, we work in these tones of grace, and we see ourselves in various shades across the spectrum, and we respect each other so much that we don't want to try and say, this is the one thing that we're all going to say on this side, because that doesn't feel right to us, does it? And so we end up with a lot of voices saying different things. But I would think that if we on this side could come up with one word, I would choose the word justice in response to orthodoxy. Because I think that I don't follow a Savior who, I'm going to preach it, I'm sorry y'all, that I don't follow a Savior who says that orthodoxy is something that rises above justice at all. That is not my Jesus. So that's important. All right, let's roll. Skip the slide and we'll go. General Conference. Since the General Conference, there's another thing that's happened. And there's actually one thing I'll add before this that came out after Adam had his conversation with his church, and really I think since his last blog on it. It's something that causes concern. It's not something, I think it's real easy for us to grab a hold of and want to shout how bad the other people are in this conversation. But the Commission on the General Conference, which is a group that oversees all the work of the General Conference, the Commission on the General Conference discovered in auditing the voting and so forth that had happened, that there were 4 delegates from Africa who were unable to get visas and unable to be there, and yet somehow magically voted, and we don't know why, we don't know how. And so it's pretty easy for us to see the problem with that. And yes, the United Methodist Church, if you've ever been on a committee or board with me and they say, do we have a quorum? I remind them that the quorum in the Methodist Church is present to vote. Whoever's present gets to vote, and that's your quorum. It doesn't matter if So that's the reason I always tell groups, don't take your job on a committee or a board very seriously. But since the General Conference also then, Mainstream UMC, which is an activist organization, the executive director, the Reverend Dr. Mark Holland, received this horrible letter that came from Dr. Jerry Kula. Jerry Kula is Liberia. He's the dean of the School of Theology there in Liberia, and he has been an outspoken person on the floor of the General Conference. I heard him speak multiple times, and he is always harsh in things he says. What he says to Dr. Holland is, "It's time for y'all to get out." That's what he says. I mean, that's just the long and the short of it. And so this is, I had some things that came here that are from that website. So either member of a marriage can demand a divorce. We clearly do not love we clearly do not have two willing parties to work on the relationship. And that's something that that's the reason I'm saying that I'm seeing possible schism here is, and I'm not predicting it, I'm just saying that I see what feels like a shift here. And for so long, the WCA, which is still to meet, and I don't know when they're going to be meeting, but when they meet, the assumption had been that they were going to take up and leave the church. They may feel like they've got enough momentum to win, to take it. Here's the problem, and this is where Dr. Holland is incredibly mature here. He's the adult in the room. I will tell you this, that he says we do not want to harm our African sisters and brothers because there's a lot at stake here. But if the church falls apart, I'm going to tell you the way it looks right now is that somewhere between 60 and 70% are centrist to progressive in the U.S. So, meaning it's still fairly broad spectrum, but these are a group of people who, by and large, think that this legislation that's passed is undoable, is horrible, and will not accept it. 60%. So if the church breaks apart, the large African contingent, which is a growing church, it is growing, and Kula made this very clear. We do not need your, and he had pointed out a couple of things. I'm not going to deny him some of his points, but we don't need your imperialistic money and your imperialistic evangelism any longer. Well, the problem is that when you look at the funding of the African church, by and large, it's a large percentage is still funded by U.S. churches. What happens if 60% of that funding goes away for Africa? How does that happen? I'm not suggesting that anybody would, but I think that we need to make sure we still live by the general rules. We'll talk about that in a minute too. The general rules. Does anybody know the general rules of Methodism? You know, there are three. One, do no harm. What's the second one? Do good. What's the third one?
Keep on loving God.
Yeah, keep on loving God. It's actually attend upon the ordinances of God, the means of grace, is what that is. And so stay in love with God is the way Bishop Reuben Joe put it back years ago. But three rules, and I will not let us be part of something that harms people. We're asking for that to stop now. Why would we turn and just harm another group of people? So I think that's important. The other thing that's another quote in there was that, and this speaks to Kula. Funding for theological education, I saw this happen in 2016. I was watching a live stream whenever it happened. But amidst all this discussion about things, suddenly there was a request from Dr. Kula let's say Bishop, he's not Bishop, but Dr. Kula that came to the General Conference to double the theological education funding from $5 million a year to $10 million a year. And that passed, thinking we're just going to move forward in this. Well, the problem is that that's going to be undoable as well if the church falls apart. And then here's the other quote from, I think this one's from Dr. Holland, is it's one thing to hold a conservative view of Scripture. It is quite another to advocate for all who disagree to leave the church. That's a that we have never had that happen in Methodism, even when we had the breakup over slavery in 1844. So we have never had somebody tell somebody else you have to leave. Now, Wellspring, what we're doing. Many of you heard my statement on the 3rd when after I was back from General Conference, and you heard what I said. I had written that out very carefully, and the governing board has endorsed my statement to my statement on the General Conference. So that's one step. Our board has also approved. Here's one of the downsides. I'll tell you the pattern where this comes from on withholding of any apportionment amounts. Church of the Resurrection, their apportionments, their annual apportionments are $2.5 million. That church is so strong that they pay their apportionments half in January and half in February. So they have half of it already gone, and then their board and their pastor are withholding the last half of their apportionments. So that means something. If you live in Kansas, and if you're on any Kansas conference staff, that's a little nerve-wracking to know that there's $1.25 million that might not come to you out of your total budget, because most annual conference budgets range anywhere from probably a low of $9 million up to about $15 million. So if you take do what? Yeah, talking about 10%, talking about losing 10% of your apportionment fund in that conference, okay? So as far as the budget's concerned, now not all that apportionment dollar goes to the conference, much of it goes on. Our church is likewise healthy. We have a much smaller apportionment amount of $64,500. We are healthy enough, though, that before we had any conversation or any thought about withholding, we were paid 72% in. So we're holding about $18,000 is what we're holding. And so it's largely symbolic. It's not really hurting anybody, but it's symbolic. And so and it doesn't mean that it won't be paid. What we're doing is we're going to wait. This board, our governing board, meets 5 times during the year. And so we have another meeting coming up in May, and we'll look at it again, and then we'll look at it again in September and see, but we're not spending the money elsewhere at this point. We are simply setting it aside. And just want you to know that today's presentation is key. I think we will want to have conversations within the church about how we move forward, and to get your input as well. The governing board, did I repeat something? I can't remember if I did. I did miss something. The governing board asked that our relationship with Reconciling Ministries Network be highlighted. That's done on our website. And so we have at the top of our website, you'll see is our logo and RMN logo side by side, same size. We decided that that's the best way to do it. Then a link below that. First of all, it's a quote from my statement, and then the full statement is linked on there that goes to my blog that shows that particular that particular link. And so that's what was endorsed by the governing board. So we haven't yet done anything with the sign. Several churches have done things to put in Trinity. Conveniently used a rainbow banner to cover up the word Methodist on there, and so United Methodist got somehow conveniently covered with a rainbow banner. Others have done various signs and so forth. We may what we have though is we've got a sign that is out front that we have lots of movement on in terms of what we put out on the bottom of that sign, the banners that go there. So we'll be discussing what we do as a church. Now, the other thing I would tell you is that since the General Conference, one of the best places to track and see where this conversation goes across is in it's called Hacking Christianity. And so if you go to their main website, you can go just to hackingchristianity.net, and then you'll see up in the left, you'll see United Methodist right below. That's the main, and then that's where the link is right there is the United Methodist. You can go there and you can begin to track all kinds of stuff there in United Methodism. There is a link there that is basically everything that's happened since the General Conference. Is that longer link, which again, I'm sorry for that. We would hope to, and I'll have to look. I think that link may not be active the way I did the PDF. It would be emailed out, but so it requires you just looking. Beyond today, the Judicial Council will be meeting. So when the Judicial Council meets, they'll be meeting on April 23rd through 26th in Evanston, Illinois. And Tim Brewster, who, how many of you been around Georgetown long enough to know Tim? He was the First Methodist here for several years. Tim is the pastor at First United Methodist Church in Fort Worth. He is a strong spokesperson on the very progressive side. And Tim was finally recognized. There were several that were trying to be recognized for this referral. Tim was the one that finally was recognized, and he came to make the motion that all of the traditional plan be referred to the Judicial Council for a declaratory decision. Okay, what does that mean? It means that they're going to have to look and determine if it is constitutional. Tim, I've seen his brief. Tim's brief is pretty clear, and he makes a very good case for something that when at the General Conference, so forgive me, I'm going to talk a little how the business of the conference works if you have questions. Hope I don't muddy it too much for you. There are multiple petitions that create a body, okay? So every petition is trying to deal with some paragraph in the discipline. And so what they attempted to do was they had all these petitions, and it had been presented as part of the traditional plan. That's what it was presented as. It was during the Tuesday of the General Conference in what was called the plenary session, and Bishop Cynthia Harvey was in the chair, and which meant that she was the person leading the conference and presiding over the conference. And she had a parliamentarian at the conference, the General Conference secretary sitting next to her, and so she had lots of help in her ear. And somebody rose for a point of order to ask that we could divide the question. What that means is that I want to take this one part of it and vote on that separately, up or down. So let's take some of these petitions off and divide them. And that was declined. And she used parliamentary procedure for one, which that the Judicial Council doesn't care that much about. She uses the discipline itself, but then also it became the will of the body, because when she made that ruling, there was an appeal to the chair, which means that you can appeal the ruling of the chair, and you can ask the delegation to uphold or to overturn the ruling of the chair. And the conference, the General Conference itself, upheld that the whole thing belongs together as one body. This is where it gets interesting. Tim has in his brief, Dr. Brewster has said that he's making a claim that the traditional plan that has to be treated as a whole, and therefore if any part of it is unconstitutional, all of it fails. If you get your arm caught in the shredder, you're all going in. And so, using a terrible imagery. So yes, I do have emotions about how I think this should go. So the way this would work, and we don't know how they will rule. They supposedly could divide the question, but he makes a very strong case. He also, I think I've covered that. So CTC Progressive Clergy have an organizational meeting on April 2nd. So our Central Texas Conference, that's who CTC is, in Glen Rose, that's the clergy. We have laity who are wanting to be part of the conversation. We're going to start figuring out how to engage laity in conversations, both in local churches and across the conference. We will be closely monitoring decisions and proposals that come from the Western jurisdiction, I can tell you that, from Church of the Resurrection and others who are stepping up. The Upper New York Annual Conference is also another strong annual conference. The entire northeastern jurisdiction has some strength in it. So there are things that are going to be happening, and I will be trying to keep you apprised as the church. I want you to know, what I can share, and I want to be able to support this church so that you don't feel blindsided by this. Okay? So, here's the thing, that the sleeping giant of United Methodist centrism has been awakened. That's what's important. In one of his speeches against the traditional plan, Adam Hamilton said, "You've done something here that no general conference before you has done. You've awakened a sleeping giant of the people who are in the middle, who will not see this harm done." And he's exactly right. I've had more encouragement from people who really are centrist and who say it's time that we end this. It's time that we speak up. It's time that we have the church that we have longed for. It is time. So, let me move to the questions that I had submitted, and I'm going to run through those kind of quickly. What consequences do we face by withholding apportionments? There's always sort of this implied consequence that can be held against the pastor, but that's if the pastor wanted to move. I don't, so not anything really that bothers me that much. There can be consequences over a period of time, but truthfully, here's the thing. We are one of those churches that pays, every year is paid 100%. You know what the biggest consequence is that George and I and Steph Schutz are going to be at conference, and we get every year we get the 5-star award for paying all of our apportionments, for being active in mission and all this kind of stuff. And George, this might be the last year we get it. I don't know. Which that's just horrible thought. So, how likely is it that the denomination splits? I've told you some of the things that have been happening. I don't presume that Dr. Kula speaks for all of the conservatives, but he has been a strong voice, and he has been, I'll try to use this nicely, he's been co-opted by many of the conservatives, part of the Western Covenant Association. And so I think he thinks he speaks with their voice, whether he really does or not. If one party says we can't be in this together, and frankly, at this point, the group that we thought was leaving appears to have torched the house, so maybe it's okay if we go. I don't know. I really don't. I've been a Methodist all my life. I've been a United Methodist for 49 of those years. And God can do anything God wants to do. God's bigger than the United Methodist Church, folks. And I just want you to hear that. We will still be in ministry. We will still have a Wesleyan witness. No matter what happens, we will still be the church. So I do not want y'all afraid. I've had people have asked, what is our role in such a decision? Our role is for us to have a voice, and at some point we could have something it's really not terribly binding, but we could have a resolution that our governing board may have that may bring to the church body for a church conference to have some sort of a resolution. I don't know how that looks. I think what we do is we keep speaking to one another. I think we keep speaking to the broader context of our world. I think we stay in contact with people even with whom we disagree. Don't cut off conversations. The local church is so much better at doing conversations than the general church is. So, and the other thing is that there are people who are leaving, and we know that. And I ask you please to stay. I need your voice. Do not let this drive you away. And I don't care whether you agree with me or disagree with me. Your voice is important. We have had some people, we've had a couple of couples who have pulled from our church membership who believe that we're going way too far on the progressive side for them. And I'm sorry, I wanted their voice. I do not celebrate that in any way. So the church property, right now, we still have what's called the trust clause that's in our deed that says that our church property itself is owned by the Central Texas Conference of the United Methodist Church. One of the things that's actually going to be also that was passed, and it was, so I could talk all day about all the political maneuvering that went on a general conference, but then I could, if y'all wait, I could show it as a bedtime story. The thing that we've realized is that there's a way to exit. This notion of gracious exit. What happened was that there were three petitions for disaffiliation, and they all said something different, had some different impacts on the discipline. The discipline really it's really not constitutional to say that we're going to write something in discipline that says that even though the trust clause is there, you can just take the property and leave. It's just, it doesn't make sense to write that into the very book that says no, it doesn't belong to you. But churches have already been withdrawing from the denomination. And conferences, bishops, conference boards of trustees, jurisdictional, colleges of bishops have been generally in agreement that if a church gets to that place and is ready to pull out, and some of them have simply gone independent, that they can do that. I will tell you, if y'all watch Adam say this, I will say it 100 times louder. We will not be independent. I do not want to be independent. Our connectional witness is so much stronger than just our local church witness. So we will maintain some connection somewhere. I don't know what that looks like. So the fact is, though, there will be some conversations about property, but if they're in the event of a schism, we'll have to figure out. We just have to sort out who owns what. Okay. Another question was what happens to staff retirement plans and benefits in the event of a schism. Y'all are making the assumption that we actually have great benefits for our staff. Go ahead. Nothing happens. The pension, the pensionable amounts are off the table for anybody. That belongs only to the recipient. And truthfully, I'm serious. Insurance, we just don't have enough staff to offer insurance benefits. So there's an option to go through our general board of or West Path to get insurance, but it's really expensive. Whenever I went for a single person, it's offered. It can be an offering, but it's just expensive. So, we will continue to work to develop our staff, and we do take that seriously about the effects that this would have on our staff and so forth. What happens to us as a reconciling congregation in this climate? We get stronger. That's all I think. Honestly, I'm going to tell you. Here's one thing that I'm going to speak to, and I will speak clearly and carefully because I do not want to offend my brothers and sisters who are in other churches. But one of the things that Bishop Joe Wilson said to a group of clergy, mostly our clergy, after General Conference was over, whenever I called everybody together to debrief very quickly right after General Conference, he said that a church that has effectively briefed before General Conference will be able to effectively debrief. So that's what I'm hoping we're doing today. We're able to effectively kind of debrief this, help you get to a place that you understand what did happen. The thing also is that we have had the conversation that other churches are just now having. So here's the thing. You may remember if you were at the church church conference, which was in June 2017, 2018. No, 17. Can't remember. Couldn't tell you my name right now. At the church conference in June of 2017 is when we became a reconciling church. And one of the things that I said, I think I said this in just a church family gathering like this that wasn't taking any action, is that we are having a conversation right now that every United Methodist Church will have to have within the next 3 years. And I was right. I was right. We started our conversation back in 2014. We started having conversations here. We had our holy conversations. We learned how to do it. We learned together about how to speak openly with each other, how to embrace one another, even when we disagree. And that's something that's critical, that we did that. And so what's happened for us is that people are now looking, those who have been perhaps Methodist in other settings and other places are saying, where can I go that I find that group that I agree with? And the fact that we are a reconciling congregation stands out. And I will tell you that even while we have had some people who have left, and we bid them well and wish them well, we have had more than double that coming to our church since the General Conference. Okay? So it's being well defined works. It's important that we do that. And then I've had a number of people who have asked me over and over what consequences are for me. Assuming I just don't let the stress get to me, nothing. I have not. I'm keeping myself in the game by playing generally according to the rules of the discipline as it now exists. The other thing the General Conference did was it said that it was going to be, they put off for the execution of this plan until for a year. So that gets us almost to the 2020 General Conference. By then, something else may have happened completely. But under the current discipline, I still could be charged if I did a same gender wedding. Here's what I'm going to tell you. I won't be the one that will be signing a marriage license, but I will be there. And we have clergy who are retired clergy who have stepped up and said that if we have same-gender couples who wish to be married, they will be married by a Methodist pastor. It is an act of resistance. It is an act of resistance that is calculated because retired clergy are a little bit safer. A little bit. Speak to it, yeah, a little bit. The Judicial Council's already ruled that their pensions may not be messed with, that their pensions are off the table. Their benefits are off the table. They will still have benefits to retired member of the clergy regardless of what happens. They could have charges brought. They could be placed in some level of suspension, but what does suspension from retirement mean? Does that mean you have to go back to work? Is that what suspension from retirement means? I don't know. But I'm saying that I've had clergy who have, and two of them are here who have spoken to me about that and who have said that they will stand and do that. So, and I want you to know that we will be in ministry together in protest of the decision of the General Conference, waiting to see what true dissent looks like, what that feels like, how we're going to do this. The other thing that I gave you, which I think is important, is the message that comes from the Executive Committee of the Congregations of the United Methodist Church in Germany. It's originally written only in German, and it's translated. It's the only PDF that I actually just found is a one-page PDF that said pretty much what needed to be stated. One of the things that I also was kind of chuckling to myself about as I read it is from both sides of my family, from my mom's side and the dad's side, there's a good amount of German blood that comes down to me. So I can be just as rebellious as these Germans can. So I really appreciate your statement. So what other questions do y'all have? We've got a few minutes for questions.
So how's Mike Lowry been? What's he say?
The bishop has been, he has not been terribly vocal. He's also not, he's not a person who would deny me my voice. And so I will respect him for that. And I want that known, is that he disagrees with me. He stands on the side of being more conservative, having traditional language. I don't know how he feels personally about the more punitive measures that were enacted. He has not spoken to that, to my knowledge, but he is a person who I give him his right to be where he is and to say what he does, and he has in no way tried to infringe me from moving forward.
What about our three churches here in Georgetown? Is anybody, are they heading in our direction, or are they more conservative?
I think they're across the board. I kind of hesitate to speak for First Methodist or St. John's or St. Paul's. I sense that there's a bit of diversity, especially among the three. There's a good bit of diversity, but I'm not really sure. So.
Yes, you did great. Really appreciate your presentation. I've been involved out at First Church, and I'm a retired pastor, and sat through their meeting. And right on. What can you say about the Judicial Council at Construct? Anything to say about that?
Yeah, in terms of the makeup of the Judicial Council, or
their personalities, the temperament, whatever.
Typically, even though we have, and if you look at the people who are on the Judicial Council, we have I think at least 2 people from Africa. Maybe I don't remember. We have a lot of, I think theologically, there's a broad spread of theological spectrum there. What I see in the Judicial Council, what I really sense is that they do take a very hard look at legal standards. They really try to ask the question, does this pass muster with our Constitution? Does this violate? Some of the arguments that they've been prone before to, like, okay, I'll back up. They had a pre-look at all of these plans, okay? And what the Council of Bishops had simply referred the plans for a declaratory decision prior to General Conference. And what they did is they went through and they said, for even for the one church plan, the one I was really hoping we would at least get to, they said, here are the things that are wrong with it that would not pass muster constitutionally. And then they didn't even, the conventional conference plan, it required so many constitutional changes, they said we just can't comment on it. But then the traditional plan, they actually marked up quite a bit. And when we had, on the 17th of February, when we met and we had Bishop Wilson here with us to go over what was coming, we had a redlined copy of the plans showing what the Judicial Council had struck and said was not acceptable. So what happened at the General Conference, these plans were already in the advanced DCA, the Data Christian Advocate, so they were already presented there. The committee attempted to perfect some things when they met as a committee of the whole, which was insane. But they tried to perfect some of these to send them forward, and they didn't get to make very many amendments on the traditional plan before they sent it. So they attempted to do some of that during the plenary session and didn't get very far because there was a lot of debate. There were a lot of other amendments that were coming from the progressives as well, and there was a moment that was really kind of funny. There was a General Conference, not Judicial Council, but there was a moment that was funny when Tom Berlin stood up and he said, and they were talking about amendments, and he said, we got amendment, here's our stack of amendments. He held up a stack of papers that was about that thick, and we had a hard stop on Tuesday at 6:30 because the dome was going to be used. They had to get everything cleaned up, cleared out, because at 2:30 a.m. they were rolling in the monster trucks for a monster truck. Tom said, we've got enough amendments to keep us here until the monster trucks roll. And so what happened was it got tripped. A lot of the perfection of that traditional plan got tripped. The Judicial Council, it will be interesting to see whether they take Tim's assertion that it all goes together, that it either all rises or all falls. And that's going to be the thing that I'm hoping for, is that, because I think there are plenty of things that they can find that would be constitutionally invalid. So typically the Judicial Council has upheld many progressive cases, but they try to say, we're just sticking to, this is what this says and we believe this does not match it, kind of thing. Does that help? I'm about 10 steps removed from Judicial Council. You have any other thoughts on it?
You shared a lot, and I'm hopeful.
Mm-hmm.
The Judicial Council, though, is elected by General Conference.
Yes.
By
Yeah.
General Conference. When I was delegate back in '96 the last time,
Mm-hmm.
at that time, the churches, the traditional churches, were working hard to make sure their groups were elected. So it's important.
Yeah.
Who's elected.
And it's important too, this is one of the things I will say to you kind of as we close.
Could you repeat what she said?
Oh, I'm sorry.
For those who can't hear you.
Okay, for those who didn't hear, that the Judicial Council is elected by the General Conference. And the Western Covenant Association, I always call them WCA, has said that they want more of their people on the Judicial Council. Tim is actually the first clergy alternate to the Judicial Council. So he's recused from this meeting because he had to submit a brief. So, but there are some things that we can, as we talk about what the Judicial Council will be doing, it is possible that it can shift in the coming quadrennium with a more conservative voice. I don't know. It's similar to the U.S. Supreme Court.
Could you tell us the difference between the Constitution and the discipline?
Okay, the discipline has it has at the beginning of it has our Constitution. So the Constitution is, if you want to, and I don't have a discipline with me down here to show you, but there's part of the first part's Constitution. Then we have our social principles, and our social principles are not necessarily church law. These are our social principles. We have a big part of it that we failed on completely, which is called our theological task, which says that we use not just tradition, but that we use Scripture, reason, and experience along with that to speak theologically in the church, and we didn't do that. The other thing is, and this is something when you brought that up, Nanny Ruth, that the Constitution has what are called restrictive rules. Tim refers actually to one of those restrictive rules, which is the fifth restrictive rule, which says that the Articles of Religion of the Methodist Church that came over in 1784 with Francis Asbury, and the Confession of Faith from the EUB Church, and the general rules of Wesley's general rules are held as high a standard within the Constitution. They're protected within the Constitution. So all we really had to do, and this has been the problem that we've not been able to overcome this, to verify that even the current language of this one is doing harm. Because if we could ever really make that case, then it would be removed as being unconstitutional. But so there's a lot that's already in the discipline that's unconstitutional. Then we begin the paragraphs of the discipline that go on all the way through 2500s and or more, I don't remember the number, but we have all these paragraphs that then deal with everything from clergy to life of local church, laity, conferences, so forth. So I'll be glad someday no, I won't. Started to say I'd give a class on the discipline. I don't ever want to do that. Yes?
At the various annual conferences that will be taking place in May and June, delegates to the 2020 conference, General Conference, will be elected.
Right.
Given
Yep.
Theoretically.
It's theoretically possible that the 2020 General Conference can do it.
Delegates to General Conference this year, next 3 or 4 months, is pretty important.
And one of the things that we have done is we're encouraging, part of the reason that Tim especially wanted us to have at least one gathering of the progressive clergy before, whoever we can, probably going to be like 30 people, before Easter, was because we want everybody to, we want people who are like-minded to be sure that they put their name in. We have something that's changed on the clergy side. On the lay side, I'll tell you about that, but on the lay side, any member of any full member within an annual conference. So if you're a member of our church, you can be elected as a lay delegate. Now we only have 16 total thus far. I think it's the right number for us for next year, that will go to general, A for jurisdictional, and then which adds to the general delegates. So I'll have to, let's again explain that more later. But the clergy have always been able, because I've been on the list, because I'm listed as a full connection elder, any full connection elder, any full connection deacon could be. You just have this list of all these clergy. Well, we have, I don't even know how many clergy we have. It's 500 or something, I don't know. And anyway, but so we would all start. Everybody would have at least one vote because they vote for themselves one time. But we went through. We changed something in the rules of the annual conference that we now have to do opt-in. So I'm eligible, but in order to be considered, to be listed, I have to put my name out there. So the last time the general conference, Tim asked me, not me, us as a group of progressive clergy standing there, be sure you put your name in. And so several of us have already put our name in. We're going to be working also to perhaps focus ourselves on a few and to see who those few can be who could get to general conference for next year. The laity, it's similar. The laity opt-in, they sign up. There's a place to sign up on ctcumc.org is where you can sign up, and you can just search for annual conference or general conference delegate, and laity can find a place to sign up there. I want to close with just a word because we're gone long. Nancy Schutz is right here, and her daughter Steph, who she didn't end up staying with us on FaceTime, is it?
No, but she couldn't hear. So
Okay.
She's gonna. I told her at the end.
So Steph has been a member of our church from her.
Yeah, little 3, 4.
Yep.
Baptized.
And so she came through our church, and when she was in high school, Steph was elected to general conference as a student. And then at the general conference, she was placed on the highest programmatic body of the denomination on the connectional table, which is they were the ones that basically worked for large programmatic ministries. Steph, a couple of years ago, she had finished her nursing degree. She's now a nurse in San Antonio, and she still comes up enough to say she's active with us. So she's on our governing board. She is a lay delegate to annual conference, and we're going to work and beat the drum until we can try maybe get her elected. So we want Steph on that. So if you know any other delegates to annual conference to any other church, just tell them to remember the name Steph Schutz. And so we're gonna put her up there as high as we can. So yes, ma'am.
I'm going to stand up so you can hear me. Because you're taking a somewhat leadership role within this progressive movement, when it comes time to move the pastors in June throughout the country, would you have the option of declining a move? Because
Yes.
I'm thinking there could be some punitive.
Now here's the thing that can happen. First of all, I think we fairly sealed our fate together by being a reconciling church and a reconciling pastor. So I think that we've got a pretty solid marriage here as far as I'm concerned. If the bishop decided for some reason that I was going to move, the bishop's word will be final. The way it's written, but we use a consultative process. So the pastor annually said, and I put down already for next year, and I'll put it down for the next however many it is until I retire. yes, I want to stay here because I do want to. I'll tell you all. I have my 58th birthday. I plan to just stick around here because I do long-term pastorates. Now I can't. It's hard to make that promise because I am still Methodist. But I will say to you that the other part of the consultation is this church, is the leadership of this church. So the governing board serves as a whole as our SPR. We have members of that who are defined up to the subgroup, but as a whole, our board is the SPR. So if the bishop were to make an effort to try and separate us for some reason, that the board also has a say in this, and I have a say. So I honestly don't think the bishop's going to be too concerned. I don't think that it's going to be a problem. So,
It'll be a torchlight parade.
Resistance, rebellion, kind of similar things. So anyway, yes, ma'am.
Can we go back to the judicial group for just a second?
Mm-hmm.
When they interpret the word do harm, is it specifically to do harm, not to do harm against people, or does it consider financial things and everything else that we relates to?
I don't know how they would interpret it. When we say do no harm, we mean don't hurt people in any form, economically.
Is that generally accepted across, like when they make a decision, would they be considering financial things as well as financial?
They could. They could. I think that it's something that the progressives are much more onto in terms of really pushing the conversation to do no harm. But I don't know. I don't know how that broadly would be interpreted, but I kind of take it mean play nice, don't hurt people, love God, put that somewhere. So
Yeah.
okay.
Jeff,
Yes.
the third general rule
Mm-hmm.
is to avail yourself of the means of grace. That's the third general rule. If the church tells a group of church members that they cannot avail themselves of the means of grace that matrimony within the church offers, is that not breaking that general rule?
Oh, I think so. Clearly, I think we're pretty horrible with the general rules at the general level. So, quite frankly, I mean, I make no bone about saying that, and I would argue that all day long, Milton. Exactly. So, friends, we could go on quite a while, and I know it's already late. It's been a long day, but.
Obviously, I'm just a member here, but I've been learning a lot today, sucking all of this up like a sponge, learning another side of Methodism that I'm used to seeing. I just want to thank you for your courage, and for your leadership, and for the pastors, for wanting to be a part of all this. I love this church, and I love what you do.
I feel your love and your affirmation daily, and I do appreciate that. I would ask that we stand, and I'm going to ask you to find a hand to hold. And, find a hand somewhere. Let's pray. God of all grace, it's you. It's you who are so much greater than our sinful, broken selves, our tedious and sinful, broken church sometimes. But we're going to say that we trust you right now to lead us, to empower us, to engage us, to be the church in all that we do. Send us forth confident in your love and your grace that is abundant, that never, ever separates